All right. Hello, hello. Thanks, everyone, so much for tuning in tonight. We're here with the Out and Equal Workplace Summit, and our topic today is advancing social justice through sports. We have an exciting panel coming up for you. I want to first start off by introducing myself as the moderator. My name is Jennifer Reynolds, pronouns she and her. I'm with the nonprofit organization called You Can Play, and we work for LGBTQ inclusion in sports for all athletes, coaches, and fans across North America. I live and work in Toronto, Canada, where I work for Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, who owns the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Toronto Raptors, and Toronto FC. And I'm heavily involved with our D&I work up here in Toronto. I want to start off by getting to know our panelists here tonight. So Jeff Scott, why don't you let everyone know who you are and what you're about?
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you to the entire You Can Play team for allowing us to have this platform, this opportunity. So yes, I'm Jeff Scott. I'm the Vice President of Community Development and Growth at the National Hockey League. My role and responsibility is ensuring that our game continues to engage communities from a D&I perspective, right? Making sure that our programs, our initiatives are able to truly impact the communities that we live, work, and play to create healthy and vibrant communities. And of course, we understand that that's extremely important for the future of our game, and it's through partnerships like this that we have with You Can Play that will allow us to do this. So we're excited to be here. We're excited to always be a part of the conversations, to be a part of the movement, and I'm excited about the conversation today. So once again, thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Looking forward to having with you. Marcos.
Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for having me today. So I'm Marcos Perez. I work for the National Football League as a Director of Media Strategy and Business Development. In addition to that, I'm also a co-chair of our Pride ERG group, a co-founder of our Latinx group, Liga, and I serve on one of the several diversity, equity, and inclusion councils within the NFL. So really excited to be here today and to share with everyone. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. Last but not least, Anya Packer.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be a part of the conversation. I am the executive director of the National Women's Hockey League Players Association. So that role and function could be a little bit of everything. We're working right now very specifically on our diversity and inclusion strategies through our PA and how to spearhead that from the players through their voice. So there's a lot of BIPOC conversations going on with our players and different people and representatives throughout the entire organization and community. So that's currently a lot of what the role and function is, but day to day it's working to continue to further the sport of women's hockey and driving meaningful change. So not only am I in an executive role, I'm a former player, I'm married to a player, so it's a lot of exciting and crazy stuff going on over here at the Packer household, but it all stems from partners like the You Can Play project and partners that really drive the conversation of diversity and help us continue to color in sport and drive the better part of what we're all trying to do here is just make a better world. And as athletes, I think all of the people that we represent have such a strong hold on supporting that message.
Amazing. Well, Jeff, Marcos, Anya, thank you so much for being here. Let's talk sports. So as I open this up here, I want to touch upon the power of sports. When we think about some of these high-profile athletes, we have the likes of LeBron James, Megan Rapinoe, Serena Williams. They're all champion athletes, but they're also champions for social justice. So, Jeff, can you touch upon the platform that athletes have to promote social change and using that platform in their scope of influence?
No, we talk about influence, and there's only a handful of people within our communities that have the level of influence that professional athletes have. I mean, you're hard pressed to introduce yourself to a kid and say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they not say a professional athlete, whether it's a professional basketball player, football, baseball, and hopefully hockey, player. And that speaks a lot, honestly, to the power of professional athletes. And because I think they're so visible, because they have such a cultural impact, it naturally makes kids want to emulate the success or just presence that they have within their communities, and I think there's a lot that's, to say about that. And I think we don't give enough credit to our professional athletes, for the impact that they have on how culture is shaped. And, so that's why it's so amazing when we think about sports and we think about entertainment and we think about that as a way to break down any type of barriers or divides that separate people. We're all athletes here, and we're all a part of some type of sport or team activity. And we can honestly say that through the sport, we've been able to break down any type of barriers that would separate individuals on a normal engagement. But sports and entertainment are able to bring those people together. So I think that power is beauty. And that's something that we should embrace and stoke that flame within our professional athletes to be able to drive change, especially the change that we want to see in our communities.
So Anya, you mentioned you're working closely with your players and the Players Association. Do you have anything to add about that, about the power of sport and the platform?
I think everything Jeff said is right on when you look at the movement that's going on right now in sports that are playing. So we have a lot of sports that are currently in their return to play model. And you look at the WNBA and just what they've done in their bubble and the conversations that they've driven, how they're using their platform to say her name and emulate that. I think it creates a lot of education. And exactly like Jeff is saying, if you can turn around and say, I want to be Naomi Osaka, I want to be Angel McCoughtry, I want to be all of these athletes, and you see Naomi walk onto the court with a Black Lives Matter mask, or Angel with a Breonna Taylor on her back. There's so many different things that as athletes we can emulate, and as the face of what we want society to be, both from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, from an LGBTQ inclusion standpoint, from a trans perspective, from just making sure every mold fits together. If they can be an athlete and be engaging and be the right person in media, then we're educating our kids and our youth that they can do that too. They can use their voice. They can have that change, and they can believe in that change, and they can have uncomfortable conversations, because when every single league of ours took some time off to learn, reflect, and call to action what we should all be doing right now, people were shook. They really thought about it. And then you also had people starting narratives and conversations that were painful. And I think that that's what athletes can do. And when we started to see that, we started to be like, whoa, athletes really can make a huge difference. And I think every single one of us were proud of those athletes on that day and every day. So I think everything Jeff's saying, I'm like nodding along, but yeah, athletes are change makers first and foremost. And then I think they're athletes second.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more there. So we're talking about athletes as activists, and there are some negative comments from media and people on Twitter, Instagram saying, keep the politics out of sports, just play the game. Marcos, what do you have to say about that? How can people and athletes, fans, respond to that negativity and people saying to keep it out of sports?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and one that consistently comes up as we look within the NFL to set ourselves up for a return to play and our return to season, and reprioritizing the league's mission, values, and goals, and making sure that we're providing an inclusive place, not just for our employees and our athletes, but for our fans and for everybody that consumes the game. And I think it's really interesting when people say keep the politics out of sport, because by and large, these aren't political issues. These are just human issues. We're just talking about being a person, being represented, being visible, being included, being treated the same as everybody else, in ways that have been largely ignored by people that have had the privilege of being in the majority for so long. And so it's not a political topic at all. It's just about making people feel welcomed and included. We're not about to, and this has been in the press, so I can share, but we're not about to end racism on our sidelines as a political statement. We're painting that as a social and moral statement. We're not painting decreased funding for Social Security. That's a political discussion that you can have over an educated conversation with your peers across multiple sides of the aisle. But what we're talking about is just treating people like equals and making sure that sports like the NFL and the NHL and others create an experience that not only fans are happy to engage with and be involved with, but feel part of and feel welcomed in and feel included in, because it's a team effort at the end of the day, and we want to include everybody as best we can.
So Jeff, on that line of inclusion, so we've seen in the hockey world, the Hockey Diversity Alliance, the HDA, has come into focus, and their representation for BIPOC athletes at the on in that regard in the NHL's view of getting more diverse players involved?
Yeah, so shout out to the HDA. You know, they've been able to, you know, force conversations within the NHL that we honestly haven't really focused too much on. And you know, for our players to feel like they have this platform through the HDA to be able to raise and bring these conversations to the limelight is something that we all need, and it's something that, you know, you're almost forced to listen to and want to be a part of the solution. So when we talk about, you know, the HDA and what they're trying to do for us, it's simple, right? And it's intentionality, it's representation, it's making sure that the efforts that we put forward going, you know, as we look to the future of not only the NHL, but our entire hockey ecosystem is supportive, is reflective, is intentional about growing the game in underrepresented communities. And of course, we know that it's going to take some uncomfortable conversations. We know it's going to take some reflection for people to truly be honest with themselves about what the sport currently looks like and where we want the sport to go. And the beauty about all of this is that in order for this to happen, you have to hold people accountable and you have to have tangible actions behind what we're saying. And if you can't accomplish that, if it's all just statements, if it's all just, you know, theory or just hypothetical jargon, then of course we'll look back 20 years from now and be in the same space that we were, you know, 20 years ago. So it's the action that we're now focused on. And if we can talk about timing, you know, we at the NHL just, you know, released a press release that talked about the initiatives, talked about the actions that we're putting in place, talked about, you know, the various partnerships that we're going to amplify, you know, whether it's with, you know, the Thurgood Marshall College Fund and how we're going to invest in criminal justice research, you know, how we've established our internal inclusion councils and committees, starting with our executive inclusion council, all the way down to our youth hockey inclusion committee. So we're talking about these action steps that will take us all the way through the entire hockey pipeline, from our executive leadership team all the way down through our youth hockey and our grassroots level. So we have a myriad of opportunities here that we're not only keeping close to ourselves and close within the NHL bubble, but guess what? We're making it public, because not only do we need the HDA holding us accountable, but we need everyone within, you know, the sports in just general world to be able to say, okay, NHL, you said you were going to do this. You know, let's see you put your feet to the action here. And that's what it's about. And that's what we're excited about. That's why we were able to make these statements, because we're committed to it. We're excited about it. And it was through partnerships like, you know, we have with the HDA and many others out there, from, you know, our Players Association to our Coaches Association, to our, you know, partnerships with, you know, other grassroots organizations, whether we're talking, you know, women's hockey, all the way throughout the ecosystem. So we're excited about it, and that's where it starts, with the action behind the words that we're putting out.
So two big words coming out of there: action, and then being accountable and authentic. So Anya, how can companies, sports leagues, teams shift from a, you know, one Pride night a year and doing a Pride month in June to having a more Pride 365 approach? I know the NWHL has been a leader in LGBTQ inclusion, so I do want you to touch upon that as well. But how can we shift to having more authentic messages and not just once a year, once a month?
I think a lot of it is about embracing the change that you want to see. So if it's performative, if it's a Pride night, or if it's, you know, we want to support this in this way because that's easy and that checks that box, you start to identify what companies truly believe what they want, or believe in change, and then what companies want to just kind of move that needle and check that box. And I think a lot of it comes with education. When we start talking about trans and equality and bringing a trans player into the National Women's Hockey League, it wasn't being met with, no, there's absolutely no way. It was more educate me on that. And through that process of learning more, I'll better understand how to support. And so I think the basis of most of these conversations is education. None of us can create a really impactful D&I strategy without educating our staff, our players, our fans, the media surrounding us, how to communicate. So for us, I've kind of alluded to it, but we had a trans player in our league that we changed a policy for, and we changed for pronouns, and we accommodated him, and we learned from him. And often what that did was make us a lot more progressive. We weren't thinking about, hey, let's find a trans person to educate us on this and then move the needle. We were met with, you're not there yet, and how do we adapt and change? And I think that being able to be exposed and create meaningful partnerships out of that, like the HDA is doing for the NHL, like we're all doing with these conversations, like Latinx probably does with Marcos and changing the conversation in the NHL or the NFL, excuse me. It starts with somebody bringing to light an issue and then really adopting an education policy to wrap your arms around that change and that ethos. And I think if the company or if the league or if the player or if the team is willing to take time and energy to learn about something, there's not going to be as much friction when it's met with support. We watch PK Subban and what he's doing right now for the Devils organization and how he's just enriching the community of that whole New Jersey area and their long-standing commitment to change. And that comes from education. It comes from knowing Newark, New Jersey needed support and really leaning in on how they can do that long-term, investing in businesses, better understanding how to serve the community, having more support to the BIPOC community that's in that area that comprises a lot of the New Jersey Devils fan base. So my whole point here is that I think that we get away from performative action and we get more towards empowered action and long-term action through education. And that's the biggest piece that we always, always, always need more of.
So Marcos, you mentioned that you've been involved in some diversity and inclusion councils on the NFL. Can you clue us into some of the conversations that you and your team are having over there in terms of increasing diversity and inclusion for BIPOC and LGBTQ individuals?
Sure, absolutely. So I want to piggyback off something that Anya brought up. I think that we're in a unique, and I'm an eternal optimist for better or worse. And so I like to think that people are fundamentally good and you just got to give them a chance to get to places that some of them may not be super familiar with. I think the most interesting thing about my last season in the league has been every time I've raised something that seemed to be a strange topic or foreign to the group that I was communicating it to, I've always been met with, oh, of course, why aren't we already doing that? Like, that seems like so standard, like we should, yeah, like, is that an issue? And so it's been really interesting how you really just need to lend your voice to some of these initiatives and really have people lead the charge with some of these initiatives. And like Anya was saying, make sure that you're educating, bringing in the right organizations that are better versed to talk about certain topics. And that really helps kind of formulate that conversation that people tend to really be conducive about internally. And so to be more specific about the work that we're doing, we haven't been shy about our history not being as progressive of an organization as, we'd like to be moving forward. And I think that level of humility and self-reflection has helped lead some of these difficult conversations we keep referring to more productively. And there's been a really concerted effort to, of course, make the big splashy $250 million support or, the painting of the fields and the things that are more visible to fans. But we've also taken a very concerted effort internally overhauling our policies. We've basically instituted micro-level DEI councils effectively to look at what do our contracts look like? What do our vendor relationships look like? How are we hiring talent? How are we promoting talent? What mentorship programs do we have in place? How are we making sure that the rules that we have in place for diversity recruitment and the areas that we're recruiting from, the schools that we're recruiting from, the fairs that we're recruiting from are more conducive to the talent and the pipeline that we want to develop internally so that our workforce is reflective of the American demographic population. And so it's been a very multi-pronged concerted effort that goes beyond the outward facing elements of the game. And then the other thing that I would say is it's been a very partnership-driven exercise as well, and learning from what the NHL is doing, what the NBA is doing, what MLB is doing, what other organizations are doing, not in sports necessarily, making sure we're, again, partnering with the right organizations like You Can Play that can help us have that educational foundation that's going to make us better. Making sure that we have our copy vetted by partners in the space, and that we're writing the right language, and that we're not mischaracterizing or misgendering someone, or that we're appropriately referring to people based on their own identification. And so I think it's been a really exciting environment to be in. And of course, we're going to make mistakes along the way, but I think the fact that there's an appetite and a hunger and an awareness to, no, we need to do this right. And we need to make sure. I'll give you one concrete example. I was in a meeting the other day with a senior leader, and we were talking about the term Latinx, and whether or not we should evolve our internal nomenclature as it pertains to that community. And so there was a lot of differing perspectives and conversations, and the senior leader kept coming back to that particular topic and saying, no, we specifically need to address this, because if we're marginalizing or discriminating or misrepresenting a particular demographic group, that has to change. And so, of course, we're talking about big business decisions, whether or not we're even going to play the sport, which looks like we're going to have a great season. I'm very excited for it. But it's essential to get in the weeds with things, not just the big marketing push or the big, foundational push, but really, what are we doing at the grassroots level? What are we doing in our walls? What are we doing for our immediate workforce and our immediate player base, and making sure that we're working with the NFLPA as well?
Yeah, I think that's really great points there. And my next question for you, continuing on that, is how do we make sure that these conversations continue, that it's not just the hot topic of 2020, on piggybacking off Black Lives Matter movement, that we're really focusing on diversity and inclusion. So Marcos, anything to add there? And then Jeff and Anya as well, if you want to add on.
Yeah, definitely. It's great that you mentioned that. And I think Jeff alluded to this at the beginning as well. Every single conversation that we have had in the last 2-3 months has started the exact same way. Okay, what are the action items for the next meeting? What are we taking away? What are we learning? What are we moving forward? And I think what's happened is this kind of seismic shift, and I imagine that everyone's feeling this in their own personal lives to a certain degree, but this is no longer a side priority for me, but rather kind of a guiding principle, if you will. And so I can't really do my day job well if I'm not prioritizing these things. I can't generate revenue for an organization or worry about what our marketing campaigns look like if the people that I work with represent and the fans that we're trying to engage don't feel respected, valued, treated well. And so it's almost become this, North Star of kind of everything that we do. And then the other thing is, I think when you go out and make a very public statement, like our commissioner has made on a couple of occasions recently, some very great commentary in the media, I think that kind of in and of itself holds you to the fire, right? If you're going and saying, I'm committed to this change and I'm going to stick my neck on the line and I'm going to go and talk to, players, and I'm going to go and respond to viral videos, and I'm going to go and make these comments in the press, there's no going back. That's as much commitment as you can get. And I think, that's just the future of this country, going back to the optimism, right? It can feel at times like it's not a great time or place or moment, but I think the reality is that that there's a lot of progress coming out of these last few months and a lot of enthusiasm for change.
Absolutely. Jeff, anything to add there?
Yeah, so I think Marcos definitely hit it on the head. And, one thing I would also add to that is, at the end of the day, guess what? We have businesses to run. And as a business approach, we have to think about it in a way where we have to define what's great for business. And if we understand the demographics of our country, of our world, and we look at the demographics of our fan base, and we realize that we're missing out on, or we're only targeting a certain fan base or a certain demographic, if you put a dollar sign on that demographic that you're missing out on, you'll quickly realize that you're missing out on a lot of opportunities, a lot of money, a lot of partnerships. And for the simple fact of that, it's a way where we need to be able to identify the financial impact that we have by not engaging more fans. And when we are able to engage more fans, guess what? We're able to have a greater impact on the communities that we live, work, and play in. We're able to make a stronger difference on the future of our sport, because guess what? We all need to be sustainable, because we don't want to look up 10 years from now and the NFL is gone, the NHL is gone, the NWHL is gone, MLB is gone. No one needs that. Think about how miserable we were for those few days when there were no sports, or just think about the past few months, as we just transitioned into COVID and in the pandemic, and there were no sports on. Everyone, at least in my circle, we were all going crazy. Like, what are we supposed to do? There's no sports on. My kids can't play sports. I don't know what to do. So we have to, look at it from that sense. And then I would also say, as we think about how to keep this as a priority, is we got to continue having these conversations internally. And we have to make it personal to all of our employees and our fellow colleagues to just understand the impact that this has on their areas of the business. Whether we're talking about it from a marketing perspective, right? We can think about it how if you have a diverse representation in your internal team, guess what? That's more creativity that's coming in. When your outward facing creative materials have a more diverse look, and guess what? You're speaking to a larger audience. You're welcoming more people in. Whether you're looking at it from a marketing perspective, whether you're looking at it from a community relations or youth sports development, whether you're looking at it even from a legal or a finance perspective, there are all elements within that will have an extreme impact on your area of the business. And that's just an additional element, going back to what Marcos mentioned, as where he led it. And I just want to just touch on the point of it from a business perspective, and how that business perspective can have a huge impact on a community and a marketing and fan development perspective.
So Anya, on a positive note, with the NWHL, you mentioned that you had a transgender hockey player, Harrison Brown, and you ended up changing the policies for him. There's a number of out LGBTQ athletes in the league, including yourself as a retired player. What characteristics of the NWHL do you think has led and enabled the league to be such a North Star in guiding towards diversity and inclusion?
I think that often you'll find that women's sports leagues are very progressive. I think there's a lot that women can do, and that women will unify, and that women will empathize with. And that's our superpower in a lot of ways. And often it's one of the things that when we look at women in power, when we look at Kim Davis over at the NHL, when we look at all of these women across all sports, we had female coaches in the NFL, we have female coaches in the MLB. These women are superpowers, but they're also super empowered to speak out. And I think the more we diversify our staff and the more we diversify the people at the top, that's when you find those internal champions that aren't going to forget about diversity and inclusion, or that aren't going to let it slip, and that aren't going to say no or hear no on progress. And Harrison was a great person to do that for us and to drive progress and change. Now, as a lesbian, the head of the NWHLPA, I'm never going to forget about that. And I'm never going to watch a policy pass that isn't inclusive in that way, inclusive to families and how we build families differently, inclusive to being a mother. And there's so many different pieces that, as we diversify our executive boards and our leadership, is when we keep each of these good fights alive. And the NWHL is just very fortunate, and the same with the WNBA, same with the NWSL, the WPLL. I could go through all of the women's sports leagues, but those women will be empowered and also empathetic to problems in a way that's just immediately action. You watch the WNBA take on this Say Her Name campaign, and everything they've done has been education driven, super empowered, but also, you'll have Sabu Satali, who's a rookie who's killing it this year, not take an interview and say, I really want to focus on the topics. I really want to focus on Sandra Bland. And that can't be something that we forget about. And I think that's like a really powerful woman, taking on this weight and carrying it with her. So I think women's sports leagues immediately can be very progressive. And then from there, they drive change. The NBA made change. The NHL makes change. The MLS makes change every day. And it doesn't always come from the women, but often because they're more niche and they're more progressive, it can be an entry point to a more diverse either e-board or just policies in general. So I think a lot of it comes from our e-board. I don't let LGBTQ things through the cracks, but also women can be a lot more progressive in the way that they think, this has to be for the greater good. I've never seen a female athlete in any sport not come out with, hey, here's my donation campaign, or here's something that we're going to do that is really important to me. And I feel like oftentimes for men's athletes, to show that humanity and to show that care and compassion is something that is emulated by the gods, the top, the upper echelon. When you go through any female athlete that's making pennies in comparison, she's running a virtual 5K, or she's talking about mental health, or she's talking about LGBTQ, because women are great at campaigning and they're great at just taking something that they're passionate about and sharing that with the world. So, in a nutshell, I think that's why female sports are so important. But I think that that's something that men's sports can always emulate from their female counterparts.
Jeff and Marcos, anything to add to that about diverse representation in leadership and women's sport in general?
Yeah, representation is key, in everything that we do. If you can't see it, you can't be it. And I know we hear that. I wish I had a T-shirt to, that I could wear every day. But, it's funny. We're talking about this all from a professional perspective. But if we wanted to look at it from a personal perspective, I see it firsthand in my kids. I have a son who's 9 years old, and he's a hockey player. He's a baseball player. And, when we think about how he was introduced to the sport, it was the representation of his dad working in hockey, right? But once he fell in love with the sport, the first thing that he was doing is looking for those athletes that looked like him, right? And once he identified that, and I was fortunate enough to, of course, work with the New Jersey Devils, and have become very close with PK. And my son now wears number 76. Right. And it's just one of those things where, and he and PK are on a first name basis, and now he has someone that he can look up to, and it's all about the representation, and I encourage him to do that, whether, he's looking at it from a perspective of wanting to be a professional hockey player, or if he wants to be a pilot. I'm having him research that so that he can understand what it takes to get there. But then he also has kind of that guiding, that North Star of saying, hey, guess what? I know that he can do it, or that he has done it. I can do it as well. So, going back to Anya's point about, making sure from our top down is a reflection of what we want our future to look like. It's all about representation. And, that's why I was excited about, making the transition from the NBA world to the NHL world, just for the simple fact is that there's not many people in our space that look like me, right? But hopefully, as we look to the future and people say, oh, wow, here's Jeff Scott, this Black guy who works in hockey, didn't grow up playing hockey, but now plays hockey at 42 years old and is in love with it, and has a son who's pretty damn good. I'll be that bragging dad right now. But that's what it's about, because those people within my neighborhood and within my circle who aren't exposed to it, now, they have someone to relate to and say, yeah, I think I should go check out a Devils game or a Rangers game or an Islanders game. Never been to a hockey game before, but guess what? Jeff says it's pretty cool, so I'm gonna go check it out. And that's how the snowball, gets moving, and that's how we can make a difference and make a change. So yeah, man, I can't agree with you more about representation.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
thanks for sharing, Marcos.
To quickly add to what Jeff and Anya said, which is so spot on, about the importance of visibility and representation. I think the last thing I'll add is it's impossible to hold someone else accountable for an experience that they haven't had or been a part of. And so if you don't have the voices in the room that have that experience, that have that passion, that have that, desire to make sure that their communities are represented and included and visible, whether it's in the boardroom or on the field, it becomes very difficult to change organizations. And so I've been really fortunate, similar to what Jeff was alluding to, there aren't a lot of LGBTQ people at the NFL. There are increasingly more. There isn't a history of a lot of, there's never been an out player played actively. We continue to hope that we can create an environment that's more conducive and welcoming to the LGBTQ community. But we're leading efforts internally about making sure that we're getting more female coaches in and making sure that we're recruiting the right executive talent so that's representative. And it's been a great experience for me as an LGBTQ person, as a Latinx person that may or may not be underrepresented, to have been given an opportunity to lend my voice to those conversations and to share that experience. And by no stretch of the imagination do I speak for the entirety of those communities, but I speak for my experience, and it's a perspective that often isn't shared in those rooms. It isn't shared when decisions on marketing are made. It isn't shared when investment decisions are made. It isn't shared when we're figuring out what the right policies to institute are for our employees. And so being able to share a different perspective that isn't necessarily representative of the traditional demographic group of some of our sports, I think is really important, and it's a responsibility that I don't take lightly, and I hope we can continue to diversify our talent so that gets spread around a lot of different people.
Absolutely. So another question here from me, second to last one. COVID-19, it has shifted, turned our sports world up on its head. We don't know when our fans are going to be back in our arenas in full force. I know, Marcos, you were saying that the NFL has a promising season. Don't know about the NBA and the NHL at this point. Jeff, can you touch upon the unique challenges that you and your team are going to face in the upcoming season in terms of engaging with fans in a digital and virtual space, and how that might impact your ability to achieve the social justice initiatives that you set out for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an optimist at heart, right? And as I look for the silver lining, I'm happy that this is happening to us now, as opposed to imagine it happening 20 years ago where we didn't have access to technology and we didn't have access to being able to engage people remotely or virtually. So I think, as I want to be, optimistic about it, I'm actually okay with the fact that, we may have to start a season with no fans, and our clubs may have to engage, their communities from a virtual perspective. And thankfully, this has given us an opportunity to think outside of the box, to figure out how we can evolve and grow our business. Because guess what? We know how to do it when fans were in the building. We got that mastered. What we didn't have mastered is how to engage when there are no fans in the building. So when you now look at our arsenal of how we engage our fans, let's just say 2-3 years from now, we're going to be pretty set on being able to do both. And what we've seen thus far with a lot of our clubs and how they've been successful in engaging virtually is looking at some of their virtual fundraisers. So of course, when you think about a 50-50 raffle, that's held in arena, yes, we may have a 16,000 or 17,000 seat arena, and you're 50-50, let's just say every single person engaged in that, you can take home a pretty decent pot of, let's just call it $20,000, $30,000, right? But now what we've noticed is some of our clubs have had 50-50 raffles that have crossed the six-figure, the $1 million mark rather, and it's because they've been able to engage more people because more people can now participate in a raffle because it's now virtual, as opposed to you having to physically be inside of a building to do that. So, when we look at success metrics like that and models like that, I think it's awesome. And then when you think about the cost to attend a lot of our sporting events, unfortunately, many people can't afford to pay $200 for a ticket, or even $100 to sit in the upper level to watch a game. But now everyone is on an equal playing surface and can watch it, on their television, on their mobile devices. And what that does now is you eliminate that FOMO, and everyone is now on an equal playing surface and can engage. So I'm okay with the fact of I don't want it to be full, long term, of course, because I actually enjoy, seeing the sights and sounds and smells of a game in action. But I am optimistic about how this has been able to allow us to evolve our business and be more fluid and strategic on ways we can engage our fans.
I absolutely agree with that. We're thinking the same things over at the Leafs and the Raptors. Being able to engage fans that don't have a chance to come to our arenas on a regular basis. And like you said, it's a 50-50. Raptors broke records last year in our playoff run by being able to get people around the world to buy in and raise money for our foundation. So last question here for our panelists. I want to leave our listeners with actionable items and next steps. So what can they do tomorrow, the day after, as a sports fan, as an everyday person, to be able to help promote our push for change for social justice?
I will kick it off, guys, because I think that one of the things that I've been emulating or kind of like harping on this whole time is education. I think that every single one of our athletes right now is really empowered with their voice. So they're sharing a lot of resources, whether that's on the LGBTQ side, whether that's on the BIPOC community side, whether that's on support and inclusion as a whole. And I think that that's the number one topic. But the best way for any of our fans, for any of our supporters to get involved is to educate themselves. And then to further empower the mission. If you're looking at the NHL I skate for, or you're looking at what the NFL is doing once they start their season, it's all going to be about being a better fan and being a more socially responsible fan. Knowing when to call out injustices or microaggressions that we watch every day on social media. And as we become this virtualized sports world for a short period of time, we also, like Jeff said, have the ability to touch so many more people. So as fans, being a good fan and being a socially responsible fan and being a fan that cares about what your athletes care about, because right now it's more important than ever before. I think that that's how we drive true diversity and inclusion, especially in our fan bases, because every single one of us could have athletes that are completely dialed in, completely bought into the mission, but it's the people actually that we serve. It's the fans that make every league go. And so if the fans aren't with us when it comes to being diverse or inclusive, or accepting a trans player, or accepting a gay coach, or accepting a player of color that's going to then be the face of XYZ team, that's where we actually crumble. And it starts with our fans being socially responsible with us and supporting and loving their favorite athletes, regardless of whatever message they're putting forward of support of in a group that they might not be a part of, or that Marcos was saying, it's very hard if you don't have those lived experiences. So listening and learning is I think, the number one thing that all of our fans could do to help us drive this boat forward.
I can jump in there to piggyback off what Anya just said. So I'll tackle the question in two different ways, no pun intended. I'll tackle it from the perspective of folks that feel that they may not be fully versed in topics. The first thing I'd say is try and be humble and know when you don't know something, and then listen, and just listen to someone's experience. When someone tells you that may or may not be offensive to me, I don't appreciate the way that that's being said. This is a topic that's important to this community, because just listen. Try to not immediately go to a place of, oh, well, I'm not this or that, therefore I know better. Have a little bit of humility and have a little bit of patience and listen. And then for those of us that are really empowered and passionate, stay loud, stay active, but also have a level of empathy, because a lot of people need time and space to grow and develop, and change is hard. It's a proactive decision. It's a constant reminder of a personal shortcoming. So be empathetic to those people, and remember that in many cases, a lot of us have struggled with our own internalized challenges that we've had to overcome. And just like we've had those journeys, hopefully many more people continue to have their own personal journeys of growth. So have a little bit of empathy and patience on both sides.
You know, to take it home, I would say this is an extremely historic moment that we're going through, right? And as much as we find challenges and we find difficulties and we are looking for answers today and we're looking for change today, we have to realize that what we're going through right now has been going on for 400 plus years. Would it be great if change happened in our lifetime? Absolutely, but it probably won't. So as we talk to our fans and things that, you know, I would love to leave everyone with is something that we're talking and something that we say internally on a day-to-day basis, is that this is a movement and not a moment. We can't look at this as a moment. We can't look at this as, let's wake up tomorrow and boom, everything's going to be back to normal. Or, wow, racism is gone. And wow, everyone is created equal. It's not going to happen. But if we are real with ourselves and know that this is a movement and that it requires everyone to look at and treat each other with respect, to treat everyone as a human being, to treat everyone with the with the passion that we want this world to be a better place, you know, and we want us all to have opportunities that, you know, many people weren't afforded those opportunities years ago or even yesterday, is something that we can all have an impact in. So, you know, just be realistic with ourselves here, you know, lead with your heart, you know, just as much as you have to lead with your head. And I think as much as we can do that, as much as we can pace ourselves and remind ourselves that this is indeed a movement, then I think, you know, we will feel like we're moving in the right direction here. And as everyone else said, is talking about educating yourself, you know, on what's going on, being intentional about what it is we're trying to strive for. And then just lastly, we all have to be courageous during these tough moments, right? Courage is what's going to get us across the finish line, because it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be light, and there's going to be scary things around the corner. But as long as we can stay courageous and as long as we can stay consistent, then you know, we'll have a bright future for what we're trying to do, and that's accomplish equality and a world where we're all treated equally.
Well, Jeff, Marcos, Anya, I know that we could all stay here for hours and talk sports and social justice, but unfortunately our time is up. I want to thank you all for taking the courage tonight to share all your insights, so valuable. And to the listeners, I really hope that you took a lot out of today's discussion. I know I did. Thank you again to all of our panelists, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you for
Thanks,
having us.
everyone. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Bye for now. Bye.